And good day, everybody. This is E. Marcel Pursuit. Hope you're doing well out there. We're recording another edition of the Sports Inquirer Show on May 6, 2020. Hope all of you are safe and doing well out there in the world. On today's show, we're going to discuss the coronavirus and the continued impact on the world of sports. We'll also break down the NFL. Have not done my full draft recap yet from this past week, so I'll discuss that. Andy Dalton heading to Dallas Cowboys and some other news and notes in the world of the NFL, including the passing of Don Shula in the Zone Blitz. We'll then head over to the world of professional basketball in the stagger screen portion of the show, discussing the Last Dance documentary on the Chicago Bulls. And we also may touch on some other things in relation to sports as we head on through the show. I'm watching the Korean baseball organization literally right now on ESPN2. Very interesting seeing live sports, and I'm sure the gamblers are excited and the other people out there just see some live activity. As I mentioned on previous shows, there are only so many replays you can watch of classics, baseball or basketball or tennis. It's just a football. There's only so many of those we can watch. And this is really a bummer right now. And this transitions over to, actually, no, first of all, we got to talk about the ways you can follow us on the show. As always, follow everything that we're doing on the sportsinquirer.net, premier site for news and notes in the world of sports. We also have the Twitter and Instagram pages, Sports Inquirer, that's all one word. Do a search on there and follow everything that we're doing. Facebook, you can go to the Sports Inquirer or Sports Inquirer. And finally, go to YouTube and SoundCloud. Go to the Sports Inquirer. Our page is on there. You do a search and you'll be able to see everything that we are doing, including archives of the Sports Inquirer Show, Verbal Submission, our mixed martial arts / professional wrestling podcast, and every archives that we have for over the past few months, from our interviews and pressers of Atlanta United and Georgia State basketball and things like that. So make sure you head over to the site and check everything on there. But yeah, transitioning over to the coronavirus and the updates on there, I think teams are starting to try to find their way into the spring sports. When I say spring sports, I'm talking about NHL, NBA, Major League Soccer, are trying to find their way into starting practices. I know here locally in Metro Atlanta, Atlanta United has started individual workouts in very controlled conditions. So the league has not announced when it's going to start their games up again, but this is a way to at least get the players in shape and start that ball rolling. And also here in Atlanta as well. Well, I say Atlanta, it's interesting because we're in the state of Georgia, and the stay-home orders, what term you want to say, have been loosened up a little bit here in this state as compared to others. There's political ramifications and health ramifications of that aspect, and that's not really what we talk about too much on this show. But what that means is through the orders of our Governor Brian Kemp and through other powers, things are opening up for us. I know personally our gyms are open, salons, some of those are available. We've had the parks starting to open up again, and that's happened within the past, I would say, 10 days. So by the time we listen to this show, so what that means is that starting to see people have a little bit more options as far as that goes, as far as going to different things. But what that also means is that the professional teams that are in season, now the college sports are not in season. Those seasons have been canceled. All the spring sports, from your baseballs, your softballs, tennis, golf, all those sports are done. So no activities going on in that regard. But we have the Atlanta United, as I mentioned, Atlanta Hawks. I know they're trying to open up that facility similar to the United with the individual workouts and have those available. And they're still trying to do that, but they've held off in the NBA. And that's the thing as well that you have to consider. As I said, we're here in Georgia, and I mentioned all the things kind of opening up here, but what about the teams in the state of New York? If you're following New York State, personally, we have a lot of family there, and I'm from New York, so I've been following that closely. They are not in the current situation to have the open availability of these practice facilities that the state of Georgia's in. What about California, Texas? Florida's opened up a little bit more, things like that. But what about the state of Washington? They've had a lot of issues with this. So what about the teams based in Seattle? What are you going to do about the Sounders or the Mariners? Things like that. So it's definitely a thing you have to consider, that you want to have a fair shakeout for all of the teams around the same time. So while Georgia's able to do its thing, all the other states have to comply with that. So leagues are being very careful with that. But we have seen some leagues announce that they're going to start back up again. NASCAR, I believe, has a race in South Carolina within the next 10 days. So they're trying to start up again. The LPGA Tour announced that their first event, I believe, will be in July. That they're going to be back up and running. So all of these sports are trying to get their activities going. UFC, they're having a fight card this weekend, and it does tie to, in the main events, Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje for the lightweight title. It does tie into also with Florida, and then World Wrestling Entertainment and AEW, All Elite Wrestling. So in that, we talk about that a little bit specifically in better detail in our Verbal Submission podcast, but it does tie to sports. Those entities have been deemed essential businesses by the Florida government. So they're able to do live events, live activities, because they are nationally broadcast. Once again, politically, you can question that quite a bit, but what that means is that if that state is able to do things, what about Major League Baseball or the NBA? And now we're seeing it's not funny, but the interesting theories of how these leagues can come back. Disney World may have the NBA. I'm not joking about that. That's been a consideration for what can be done because of those Florida actions by the Florida government. If World Wrestling Entertainment is able to hold events, why can't the NBA? Why can't the NHL? What Major League Baseball? They have a lot of baseball facilities with spring training. Why not there? So it's definitely a fluid situation of all the things that are going on, at least trying to get the spring sports onto the field. And as I mentioned, I'm watching Korean baseball right now, and I see Eduardo Perez and Carl Ravage on ESPN2 doing the broadcast. Very interesting. Obviously, we're not too familiar with the Korean baseball organization and their players, but as I said, people are very excited to at least see some live activity going on there. And you look at the facility that they're at, you notice there are no fans, and I think that's what we have to expect for the foreseeable future. The no fans in the stands, and that's a big thing. So there are no fans in the stands. The players aren't wearing masks. They're out on the field doing their usual business. So that's interesting. But overall, it looks, and once these games they take place more often, they have cheerleaders too. They're wearing masks. That's interesting. I'm live broadcasting the contest for you. But yeah, I think there'll be a lot of notes taken from different leagues in the United States and internationally. We've already seen Liga One announce the top French professional league. They've announced the rest of their season is done, and PSG, Paris Saint-Germain, has been announced as the champion of that league. So we'll see what happens in Europe as far as that goes. I know that the Premier League, or the FA, the governing body of the English Premier League, they're meeting, I believe, this week to discuss what they're going to do in that regard. I think you're going to see the cancellation of the rest of the regular seasons in those leagues, because those leagues only had about 4 or 5 matches left. Now, Champions League is not going to happen, which is disappointing. That's the European champion of soccer. That's not going to take place, most likely. But outside of those leagues, I think the leagues based in North America, because you have to include Canada with the NHL and NBA with the Raptors in Toronto. Those leagues are are looking at how they're operating in Korea and seeing what they can take over or carry over into United States. But one league that really isn't affected as much as the other ones, because they're not a spring sport, they are a winter sport, or they're a fall/winter sport that they're in the middle of their off season, is the NFL. And that's where we're going to enter the Zone Blitz portion of our show, where we're going to discuss all things National Football League. My thoughts on the NFL draft, since we're going to go back. I know the draft was over a week ago, but I'm going to talk about that because I haven't had a chance to yet. But just overall thoughts on that. Follow the quarterbacks. That's really what the league is geared towards. Now, we know the importance of having your good linemen and linebackers and your secondary and all of that stuff. But those are so hard to project as far as how good those guys can be. I mean, we know Chase Young, the defensive end out of Ohio State, second pick overall by Washington. He is going to be a solid player. So we know that. And there's going to be some other good players that are going to emerge over the next few weeks. Now, I'm watching back to the baseball just real quick. I see the umpires are wearing masks on the field. That's interesting because none of the players are. Now, you say the umpires are just as susceptible or just close as the players are to everything going on. So I think that's something noteworthy to check out. Back to the NFL. Obviously, we talked about it in our last show, but Joe Burrow to Cincinnati, that was pretty obvious. That move had to be made. Not only is he the top prospect in the draft, he's a quarterback. He's from Southern Ohio, so he's familiar with the Cincinnati area. That was a pretty straightforward pick. Tua to Miami. I like that pick. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be the starter when the season begins, and this ties in as well to the coronavirus. Right now, if we were in normal scenarios, we'd have some mini camps going on right now, rookie camps, things like that. None of that is happening right now for all the reasons that we know. So what that means is that some of these players, like a Tua, heading like to Miami, or Justin Herbert to the LA Chargers, guys who may have been able to get the starting position, just being in camps throughout the spring and the summer, as we're in right now, they're probably not going to have that opportunity. I'll be very surprised if we see any of that stuff. I do think we'll get a training. You actually have the training camp in, and the NFL is announcing their schedule tomorrow on May 7th. And once the schedule's announced, you can start doing the chronological breakdown of when camp is going to start. Usually training camp, the guys arrive in camp mid to late July and then train for a month before the regular season starts, usually the first or second weekend of September, because all of August is going to be for training camp and the preseason games. But obviously with the new CBA and 17 games and the additional playoff spots, a lot going on as far as the schedule. So I really can't comment too much on what the training camp is going to be until we see that. But I will say that we know that August is a big training camp month. So I think we're going to see some of that. But between now and August, I don't think you see any football activities. So guys like Tua and Herbert, I said, they're going to have a tough time being in the starting spot or earning a starting spot for those teams. Tua is in Miami with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then Herbert with the Chargers. Tyrod Taylor is on the team, so he most likely will be the starter. But I think both those guys will end up being the start or get some starting time in the regular season once that is in full swing. Jordan Love to Green Bay to trade up for the Packers to get him. Awkward move by the Packers. Awkward for Aaron Rodgers. You signed him to a big deal just recently, so he has 4 years left on that. Obviously, he's a future Hall of Famer. The guy has led a team to the NFC Championship game last season. He's in his mid-30s, so you figure he has a few prime years left if he stays healthy. And you're bringing in Jordan Love, who, even at his best, you're not going to see him on the field. If the plan works out, you're not going to see him on the field for another 2-3 years. That's a very dicey situation. I think you're seeing Aaron Rodgers last year with the Green Bay Packers. You take a guy in the first round like that. You don't pick up any other offensive weapons outside of running back A.J. Dillon. No receivers, no tight ends in the entire draft. It's a move that you're looking at the Packers saying, we're going to go with Rodgers for this year. And he'll have his choices of different spots to go, whether it's a trade or a release. That he may get a second year in Green Bay, but he's not going to see all 4 years with the Packers. That's just the way things are going to work. I like the Jalen Hurts pick for Philadelphia for several reasons. I think he's an athletic guy. I don't know if he's going to be the Taysom Hill of returning kicks and being a receiver and running back and all of that stuff. But I think he's a guy you can see on the field in some packages. He's an athletic guy. But also, you can't trust Carson Wentz to play a full season, and that includes the playoffs as well. We've seen him he played a full rookie year, but then in the middle of his second year, he tore the ACL. Nick Foles came into the season, won him his championship. Foles was able to. Then Carson Wentz's third year, hurts his back. He can't finish the regular season. Foles goes into the fold. A lot to say there. He goes back into the starting lineup for the Eagles. They win a playoff game at Chicago, get very close to winning a playoff game at New Orleans. Foles obviously moves on in Wentz's fourth year to Jacksonville. Wentz plays a full season, regular season, in year 4, signs the big contract extension, but gets hurt in the playoffs. So in the game against Seattle. So he's not trying to get hurt. It's not necessarily his fault, but availability is essential in the evaluation of a player. And Wentz has proven that he cannot stay healthy outside that rookie year for an entire season. Hurts is obviously, and then having a backup as a rookie, that's tricky because he doesn't have necessarily the most experience. But you do have to have a contingency plan for what you're trying to do in that spot. So I didn't mind that pick. I don't think it was appalling at all. Now, the rest of the field, as far as the quarterbacks go, I think 3 guys have potential chance to see some playing time within the next 2-3 years. I think Jacob Eason is in a very good spot in the Colts. The Washington QB was taken in the 4th round. Yeah, Phillip Rivers there on a 1-year contract. I think that's a transitional year. Obviously, Rivers is at the very end of his career. He'll play the full year. He's durable. But after this campaign coming up, I think you'll see Eason get in there and be the starter for Indianapolis. He'll play behind with a solid offensive line, some weapons at receiver, playing indoors under a solid coach of Frank Wright on the offensive end. I think that's a good situation for him. James Morgan to the Jets. I know that they really their quarterback situation is interesting as well. He might be able to get a spot there. Jake Fromm to Buffalo, the Bills in the 5th round. I think Fromm, and being here in Metro Atlanta, there's been an argument, did he make a mistake going into the NFL, seeing how he ended up being a 5th round pick? I think if he came back and played his senior year, unless he pulled off a Joe Burrow type of campaign, which I want to say can't happen, but I doubt happening, he probably would have been maybe a 3rd rounder, maybe move up a round or 2 in his positioning. So he really would have stayed in the same spot, I think. And I think some guys, honestly, they want to get their professional career started. I've seen it at Georgia State personally with some of the basketball players where you would think, oh, they can come back for another season for the senior campaign, compete for a championship, whether it's a conference championship or maybe beyond, or improve their draft stock. And some guys are just done with school. And I think Jake Fromm was in that spot. He played at Georgia, was a starter for 3 years, had a very solid tenure there. He just wanted to move on. And he gets a professional paycheck. He'll be able to train and work on his craft. Now, he is behind Josh Allen in Buffalo, a guy that they really like. But maybe he'll get some time in the preseason. He'll improve. And maybe he could find a spot somewhere in the future. But I didn't mind that move at all for him, for Fromm. And finally, wrapping up the draft as far as the players go, I like DeAndre Swift in Detroit and Jonathan Taylor at Indianapolis. I think those guys could be 1,000-yard rushers in their rookie years. Every year we see one guy, whether it's Philip Lindsay from a few years ago in Denver, or Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, go down the list, Ezekiel Elliott, guys that, whether they were undrafted like Lindsay in Denver or top 5 picks like Barkley and Elliott with the Giants and Cowboys respectively, one of those guys is going to break out and have a really productive Pro Bowl rushing campaign. And I think those guys are the best candidates for it. You just look at those teams. You look at DeAndre Swift. He's going to get the ball a lot. I think Matthew Stafford are going to kind of wean away from him and run the ball more. And Swift is a guy who can do that. Jonathan Taylor, we've seen his production at Wisconsin very strong. Plays with a very strong offensive line. He's going to have some solid success there overall. I like the presentation of the draft in general. Tough circumstances. We already know they couldn't do the big presentation that we've seen in the past few years in Philadelphia and in Nashville with the really hundreds of thousands of fans being in the streets of the city. And we know how the NFL likes to do a big deal with the draft. Could not do that. Had to do a lot of video conferencing. I thought it went pretty well. Drew some incredible ratings. I think it was around 18 million for over the 3-day period. So they broke some records in that regard. Because I think we're so starved for sports and activities along those lines. So I thought that they did a very solid job overall with the presentation. Andy Dalton going to the Dallas Cowboys. I think it's a solid move for both parties involved. I'll start with Andy Dalton, his perspective. He's been a starter for a few years in Cincinnati. They obviously have, and he got hurt last year, was not able to play the full season. I think if Cincinnati didn't drop as far low as they did and have the perfect storm of having the number one pick, having a guy like Joe Burrow, who was an Ohio native, the clear number one pick, I think he's clear number one. Now, Tua, I think, is very intriguing as well, but injury history does not support him lasting a long time in the NFL. That's just the way you got to look at it. But you had all those elements together, and the Bengals had to take Burrow and get a young quarterback ready to roll. Dalton was just the odd man out in that regard. He lands in Dallas, 1-year deal. I think that for him, he makes a solid paycheck. He can definitely be a starter maybe in the future because there are injuries that take place in the league. He's easily tradable with that contract if that goes well. We'll get to Dallas and Dak Prescott scenario in 30 seconds or so. But you got to look at it from his perspective. He went to TCU, he's from the Dallas area. That was a smart move at a solid landing spot in that regard. And he might get to play quite a bit. You never know because, Dak Prescott's been very durable and consistent, but quarterbacks get hurt all the time. So if he gets an opportunity to play, he'll play behind a solid offensive team with some good weapons and a team that can maybe go places in the postseason, which really helps his credibility. So I didn't mind that move for Dalton at all if things like New England or Jacksonville weren't available, and I don't think they were for various reasons. Now, if you're Dallas, a good insurance policy for Dak Prescott. I think Prescott ultimately is going to sign the franchise tag for $30+ million for the 1 year of playing. I know they're trying to work on a long-term deal, and I think they'll ultimately get to that as well. But if Prescott does decide to hold out or crazier scenarios have happened, at least you have Andy Dalton there to be a solid contributor at quarterback spot for you. Got a lot of starting experience. He's led a team to the postseason, so you know that he's a solid backup in that scenario. And I think Prescott will sign with the team ultimately, and it shouldn't be an issue there. But as I said, you got to prepare for all things. And then wrap up things with the NFL in this portion of the show, the Zone Blitz. Don Shula died at the age of 90, winningest coach in NFL history. And think about Shula, several things about him. And this ties back. I still watch him, the NFL films, and I used to watch them all the time because they used to be on broadcast TV when I didn't have cable when I was younger. So I used to watch all the NFL, all the Super Bowl highlights, all the profiles of the great players and coaches over time. And outside of Lombardi and maybe a handful of coaches, at least some old school coaches, Shula was the guy that you knew about. Obviously, he started his playing career also as well with the Baltimore Colts, and then transitioned into a head coach at the age of 33. It's interesting because guys talk about Sean McVay and these guys getting positions at an early age. Shula was the grandfather of that regard. I mean, as I said, age 33, head coach of Baltimore, led him to an NFL championship, led him to two Super Bowl appearances. As far as that goes, we all know about Super Bowl III, the game against the Jets, and that was a negative mark on his career, but had in the beginning of his career had a very good tenure though with Baltimore. Moves on to the Miami Dolphins, coaches them from 1970 into the mid 90s. You saw him start his career in Miami, very run-based offense, led by Zonka, Mercury, and Kick, and Greasy as well at quarterback. 3 straight Super Bowl appearances, won 2 of them, including the perfect season in 1972. And then you see him transition to the 80s with Dan Marino, passing attack. So their running game was innovative in the 70s, just using 3 running backs in their blocking schemes, which had Little and Stevenson blocking as far as offensive lineman Hall of Famers. Then you have the 80s into the 90s with Dan Marino, one of the best passers of all time, transition in that regard. But the thing about him as well is that Miami, you got to remember, they didn't have the Heat, they didn't have the Panthers. Even Miami college football really didn't get rolling as far as we know as a U into the 80s. The Marlins were a non-entity into the 90s. The Dolphins were South Florida football. And when you thought of sports down there, really the state of Florida. I mean, I know the Bucks were around for a while, and you had that going, but it was all about Miami. When you thought sports in the state of Florida, you thought of Miami, you thought of Dolphins and Shula. And as I said, and you can make your all-time list of coaches, your Lombardis, Shula, Belichick, Hallis, Bill Walsh. You go down the list, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few others. But those were guys that you would hear stories about and see all the highlights and all of that stuff. So, and just him being around for a long, he's also a guy very influential in the coaching scheme. He was a mentor to a lot of guys in that regard. So seeing his passing was very interesting. I know he was struggling health-wise. I don't think it was related to coronavirus. I think he died peacefully in his sleep. But you would hear stuff that, as I said, he was 90, so he was aging. But the man is one of those one-name type of guys in the NFL. And I think he's the only guy, I don't remember where I heard this from, but the only guy in the NFL to coach against Hallis and Belichick. So that just shows him as the ties to generations of, like Hallis, who you can argue literally founded the NFL and was without him the league does not exist. And all the way down to Belichick, who is the best coach of the modern era. So just seeing him pass away, it was very interesting. But as I said, you have 3 iconic kind of era teams that you think of with them. 60s with the Colts, with Johnny Unitas and Barry and Raymond Barry and those guys. So you think about that era. And then you have the 70s and with the perfect season and just those guys. And then finally the 80s and 90s and Dolphins with, as I said, Dan Marino and all that stuff. So he was a big representation of the NFL in 3 different eras. So respect to him in that regard. I have been watching The Last Dance and watching that documentary on the Chicago Bulls, and several thoughts on it as far as what we've seen so far. And that's why also it's very tough to gauge the entire documentary because there's still more parts to go over. So when I've heard people criticize it, saying it's too positive towards Jordan and it's this and that, whatever. You got to realize right now in their timeline, we're getting to Jordan's first. They talked about the gambling. We'll get to that. But we're talking about now his first retirement. I think we're going to hear about his father and his murder, Jordan's father, the murder of him. You're going to start hearing about the gambling a little bit more, him playing in baseball, him coming back to the league. So I think you're going to start seeing a little bit more in depth of what's been going on in that regard. Because all we are up to is him winning his third championship after beating the Suns in the 93 final. So give it time, everybody. And I think you're going to see more objective, I don't say criticism, but more objective look at everything that's going on. What we've seen so far, the animosity towards Detroit, particularly Isiah Thomas, won't die. And I think about it shows the league as well. I remember I started following basketball around 1988 when I was 7 or 8 years old. So I remember watching the 88-89 finals with the Lakers and the Pistons, and no one was rooting for Detroit. Look, they're an all-time team. They may be a top 10 all-time team history of the league. I mean, you look at their squad. They had Isiah Thomas, maybe the second or third best point guard of all time. You had Joe Dumars, another Hall of Famer. Rodman, he's in the Hall of Fame. Bill Laimbeer, despicable and despised player, but was a very solid contributor. Could rebound, physicality, shoot the ball. You had Mahorn and John Sally, solid guys in the post. Vinnie Johnson, the microwave, probably one of the first guys I ever saw a specific bench player coming into the lineup to score and be a big contributor in that regard. It's an all-time team, but they are not liked by really anyone outside of Detroit. You respect them, but when I started following the sport, you kind of had battle lines. You like this, either you like the Celtics, you like the Lakers. You're feeling Jordan because he's starting to come out to his own as the top player in the league, or you represent for your local team. For me, it was the Knicks, and we'll get to the Knicks in a minute because they got to the Bulls and messing up some championship dreams for young Knicks fans like myself. But you look at it, no one really cared for the Pistons too much. I mean, we look back at them now and respect them, but they had a bad attitude. They're very physical. Some of them played dirty than others. Laimbeer was a dirty player. I'm sorry. I mean, he was a solid player, could do some things, but they crossed the line. Mahorn was close to that. He was more physical than anybody else. Rodman had some dirty moments that we've seen in the documentary. They are what they are. They're champions. You can't take that away from them. But for the revisionist history and some of these people saying, oh, you got to respect Detroit and, oh, they're just misunderstood. No. They were the bad boys. They embraced it. They knew exactly what they were. So for them to be wanting to you get respect, but you're not going to be liked. And I'm glad that you started breaking down why Isiah Thomas was not on the 1992 Olympic team for the United States or the Dream Team. Everyone puts it on Jordan, and Jordan had a lot of influence in that. And I'm sure that they wanted him on the team. He was the main guy in the league at that time. But Larry Bird had issues with Thomas, Magic Johnson, Scottie Pippen, Patrick Ewing. I would see the Knicks and I would see the Pistons beat the crap out of him. So there was no love for Isiah Thomas being on that squad. I think he was, and we've seen Thomas now, I don't want to speak too much out of turn, but he's had some off-the-court issues as far as his attitude, and I'll leave it at that. You can research that on your own. So to have him on the team would have been, and not saying that they're all choir boys on the Dream Team, but Thomas would have brought a negative attitude towards it. And this shows as well, and I didn't touch on it too much, and it ties into Cam Newton with the NFL, and I see Des Bryant as well, as I was looking at him recently. And they're black athletes, and that's coincidental. So I'm not trying to make some grandiose race statement when I say this. Your attitude on and off the court especially even more on the court than off the court. Now, off the court, if you're a jerk or you're a criminal, that's a whole nother argument. But the way you carry yourself has significance in how you are reflected. So Isiah Thomas, he did not carry himself well as a competitor, and that hurt him as far as being named to the Dream Team. Cam Newton, obviously he's a tremendous talent. He can play. He could be a even top 10 quarterback in the NFL if he's healthy and starting. but you see the videos of him on Instagram, very selfish. You see him on the field with the Superman poses and the condescending attitude towards the opponent. Why would I sign him as my backup quarterback when your role should be in the background, helping the main quarterback, the QB1, prepare for the game and to just be a good teammate? Do you see Cam Newton as a backup quarterback willingly? No, I don't think so. Des Bryant, he recently talked about how he was blackballed out of the league. No, you were not blackballed out of the league. Your skills regressed. You had a bad attitude on the field. You were yelling at everybody, to your coaches and your players. No team wants to deal with that. And that ties in back, going back full circle to Isiah Thomas. When you have that attitude, you play on a dirty team or a chippy team that has some dirty players on it. Why do you think that the dream team, which is going to be all about love and strong competitiveness and growing the game, why do you think the Rod Thorns and the David Stearns, the executives on the team, making up the team, or the teammates are going to want you on the squad? It's not going to happen. You're a Hall of Famer. You're one of the greatest players of all time. You're respected for what you did on the court. But you didn't win the game of politics in sports, and it ties into life as well. So I was very glad they broke that down, that some other players had beefs with Isiah Thomas, that this wasn't like a Jordan hate fest. As far as now, Jordan didn't want him on the team. Don't get me wrong. I'm not twisting that around. But this is the way things go in life and in sports. Going back to the Dream Team, though, in 1992, it was such a pleasure watching those teams play. Every single player on that roster was a Hall of Famer. I don't know if Christian Laettner's in the Hall of Fame as far as his collegiate contributions. He should be. But and the Dream Team itself is in the Hall of Fame as a contributor to the game. But you're never going to see that again. I mean, just having Bird, Magic, and Jordan on the same squad was incredible. Just on the same team. You just didn't see that often. Having Bird and Magic on the same team, even as a kid, I remember that was a tremendous opportunity because you didn't see him play in the All-Star game. You saw him playing All-Star games, but not together. And there wasn't much movement as the league sees right now as far as players going around back and forth. And see a Charles Barkley play on the same squad as a Magic Johnson was amazing. And as I said, I was a Knicks fan, so Patrick Ewing was on the team. And to see him on the court with Karl Malone and John Stockton, and you just didn't see that crossover East and West as much as you do now. So seeing that squad was amazing. Now, they beat up everybody pretty easily. And it made this, but just to seeing those guys on the court and also seeing Arvydas Sabonis and Tony Kukoc, guys that now we have so much technology. We're able to see the European players. You can see the European leagues and all that stuff now. But back then, it wasn't as available. So you kind of hear whispers of these guys or the legends of these players. So see them on the court was pretty cool. And it really made the game global for the entire NBA, especially in basketball, a global sport. You're all of the international players from Dirk Nowitzki to Tony Parker and the Manu Ginobili's. Those guys talk about that 92 Olympics in Barcelona, Spain. It was in Europe, so that helped as well. But all of those players from Europe and South America, seeing the league in that form, all those players together, it really made for a big situation. So just seeing those guys, the camaraderie, the practices, the competition, the gambling, all that stuff together, it's just very rare that you're going to see that ever again. So seeing the Dream Team in action, was very exciting. Now, I was a Knicks fan, as I said, and I still like the Knicks. If they do well, I support them, but it's hard. It's hard being a sports fan and follow it objectively like I do now. But back in 1993, I was all in on the Knicks. As a 12-year-old, that was my squad. So Jordan got no love from me. I wouldn't even buy Jordans when they're too expensive and you get robbed of them, literally. And they did the whole thing about the shoe deal and everything like that. Guys from my area in Brooklyn, New York, they were feeling the Jordans, but that was too expensive. To pay $100 back then for a pair of sneakers probably was not going to be in the budget for me personally. But guys would try to get the Jordans. If you can get the shirt, I mean, if you can get the shoes, you get the shirt or a hat or something. Maybe you do that. But Jordan broke out my heart several times as a Knicks fan, so I would not wear any Jordan gear because he messed us up. They did break down in 1993 conference finals. Oh, that was a rough one. They won the first two. Knicks had home court advantage, won the first two games at home, and then Jordan went off, and Pippen and the guys did their thing. Game 3, though, man, that is the one that really still hurts you as a Knicks fan. You win that game, you take a pretty solid lead, and you get a 2-1 lead in this conference finals. But Charles Smith missed those layups, and after that, series was over. But just those contests, and it was such star power back then. You had Pat Riley, head coach of the Knicks, obviously one of the greatest coaches ever. You had the New York atmosphere and the Bulls and their rock stars on that squad. You had the Ewing and Jordan, that rivalry that dated back to college. Charles Oakley, you knew he was a former teammate of Michael Jordan in that relationship. All that stuff tied into the 93 conference finals, which was one of the more competitive series that you'll ever see. But I enjoyed seeing them breaking that down. And two more things as far as what we saw from the parts 5 and 6. Yes, 5 and 6 of the series. I understand Jordan's retirement a little bit more now, this first retirement, after the 93 championship. The gambling may have been a factor, and that was a subplot as well that was very bizarre in 93. After losing the game in New York, him going down to Atlantic City to gamble, that was a big story in New York. And all the sports talk stations from Mike and the Mad Dog and all the columnists from the Daily News and the Post, they were really on him about that. I do remember hearing that, and that was kind of the first example. We knew Jordan was competitive. You kind of hear the rumors and things like that. But it was crazy because, like, man, he's in the middle of the playoffs, and he is going to Atlantic City to gamble. That's pretty wild. So for 1993 standards, now it would... It's interesting because now I think it'd be a bigger story if a LeBron James and Kevin Durant did that. If they were playing in Utah and they decided to take a shuttle to Vegas, or a similar deal. They're playing the Brooklyn Nets, and in the middle of the playoffs, they want to go to Atlantic City or go to the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut to get used to some gambling. We'd be like, wow, that's pretty crazy. And it would be roundly criticized. Back then, it was not, we don't have the internet, the media attention on our athletes like that. But it was also kind of like, okay, that's interesting. That's kind of different. But I think you saw just him burnt out after that Phoenix series, which he had to carry the squad to the finals. I still think that team, that was the best competitor in the finals that the Bulls ever faced. I know Utah had Stockton Malone for his last two championships, but I thought that Phoenix team in 93, Charles Barkley, MVP, Dan Marley, Kevin Johnson, that was a pretty good team that Phoenix faced, and they took them to 6 games. As you saw, if you watched the documentary, Barkley was at the peak of his powers. That was a really good team. Jordan, I think, averaged close to 40 points in that finals per game. I think he was just drained from that. You got to consider as well, he did the Olympic experience. I think he was just burnt out on the sport. Physically, I think he was, and he mentioned it, and there was a quote, I think physically he was tired, but mentally he was even more tired. And I think you saw him in that fishbowl, all the attention he was getting. You got to realize the grind that guy put himself through in the NBA from 1984 all the way to 1993. While you only say that's about 9 years, that may as well have been 12 or 13 years in a normal career. Just that the way that guy competed and busted his butt and grinded towards it. I think he was just done with basketball at that time. Now, me, as a 13-year-old, I'm like, why is the guy retiring when he's at the peak of his power? He's making his money. He's the best in the league. He probably had the best of all time label even back then. He solidified that with a second run with the Bulls. But you look at all that stuff, and you're like, why is he retiring? Why is he moving on? You didn't comprehend it. And then to go play baseball. And they're going to talk about his baseball, and I think, and I'm kind of projecting what we're going to see. The man he legitimately liked baseball. That was his father's favorite sport. But man, you got to look at it from his father dying or being murdered, and combined with all those games, I think the strain of the Bulls are starting to show with the crowd situation and all of that. I understand his retirement a little bit more now that I've seen the documentary than I did as a youngster. And the last point, we'll conclude the show on this because it kind of ties into just a grander scale of things. I'm glad they also talked about him, Jordan, and his quote lack of activism as a black athlete. I'm tired and annoyed of the media, both not media, the fans, even the networks. Why do we want our athletes to say anything beyond what they do as far as playing goes? I don't care. I never have cared. I never will care. Now, if you're an athlete and you want to express your political views or some oppressions and things that are going on in the world, that is your right as a citizen, as a man, as a woman. You can do that. I don't mind that at all. But why do we seek it out? And this goes with musicians and actors and all this other stuff. Why do we look to those entities as like the leading minds? Why would I, and this goes with endorsements and things along those lines as well, why would me as a voter or as a grown adult, you let the influence of a quarterback or a point guard or an actor on my favorite TV show or one of my favorite musicians, why would I let them influence what my thoughts are as far as or influence things in my life? The fact that all of these guys that always wanted Michael Jordan to be on the forefront of whatever movement it is, whether it's Black Power movement or the anything political and supporting Democrats or Republicans and all this other stuff, let the man ball, let him live. And you have these faux activists right out there and that want these guys to, and it's money ties to it as well. How would it help him if he endorsed any political figure, if he didn't do his research on them, if he didn't have a tie in it? They're talking about a race in Congress or for a Senate seat or House seat in North Carolina, a guy that was opposing Jesse Helms, who obviously he was not a good guy. We all know that. Why? Because Jordan's from North Carolina, he has to endorse this other candidate. Maybe he didn't like the candidate. I think he said he made a campaign donation financially towards him. But what if that candidate's bad too? You have to be very careful if you're a Jordan and a guy at his level endorsing some candidate who later on can be a bad guy. You have to watch out for all of that stuff. I just don't understand. And President Obama mentioned it in the documentary. There's this underlying thing where if you as a black celebrity or of whatever fame, however you come by it, whether it's through sport, through acting, musicianship, that you have to give back. That's like a big obligation. You have to contribute back to your people and all that other stuff. Look, if you want to do that, if you feel obligated to do that yourself, that's a beautiful thing. And that's a good thing. And maybe we should see more of it. But for you to tell someone how to spend their money and spend their time, how dare you? Like, how do you tell someone to do that? And you're telling your black brethren to do that, and whatever minority representation, whatever your ethnicity is or your gender, you can't tell someone how to spend their money and spend their time. You may have your causes and things that you believe in, and that's once again a good thing. But for you to look to a celebrity, and we use that term in general, to be a voice for it, that's up to that individual person. However people want to live their lives, they can live it. I don't mind the Michael Jordans and the Tiger Woods being very apolitical in their approach. I also don't mind the Colin Kaepernicks and being very proactive in their politics and their approach to things. I don't mind either one. my issue is sometimes is that people, they have these beliefs and thoughts, and that's fine, and then they don't appreciate the ramifications of it. That part I don't like of it. But if you put yourself out there, you have to realize that there are going to be some realities of it, and that's where it's like a cyclical circle of player X says a statement, and he gets, and he makes it, and then people respond like, I don't agree with that. I mean, you're gonna have your racist and your sexist and just your general bad people, but you have some people say, I don't agree with that, and then the player responds, oh my goodness, why, how dare you disagree with what I'm saying, and this is an example of the man and the system hating me. It's like, no, someone just disagrees with you. And then you have the media outlets. It's very political. Fox News, CNN, same thing happens with ESPN and FS1. It's all the same. You just do enough research, you see the ties that bind, and it's just a cyclical nature of it. But tying it up and wrapping it up with Jordan, if he was a Democrat or Republican, if he liked, whether he was conservative or a liberal, whether he's atheist, agnostic, a strong Christian, whatever. Maybe he was a libertarian for all we know. And that's his business. And now, and for people that get mad at him for not putting himself out there in that regard, that's fine. I don't do it myself personally. You don't know if I'm a Democrat or Republican. Now, if you listen to the show enough, you kind of can hear some things that maybe I lean one way or the other. But that's no one's business. That what I believe in or what my politics are. Now, if I want to put it out there, that's on me. But I think that people were very critical of it. And I'm not saying Jordan's a sympathetic figure. I'm not saying cry for Mike. Michael Jordan's all right in his world. So and this time, and also people are talking about how they felt kind of sorry for Jordan living in the world that he was in, being stuck in a hotel room. He can't go out and watch the movies with his kids and all that stuff. Look, I'm not saying money is the solution to everything and you just throw some dollars at it. But when you're a public figure like he is, he signed up for it, is what I'm trying to say. Now, there's some stuff you may not sign up for as far as invasion of privacy, as far as your family and all that stuff. That's not right. But you are the premier player in the league, one of the most recognizable players in the world. You're recognized as one of the best ever do it in your craft. You're in a lot of shoe commercials and soft drink commercials and McDonald's and all that stuff. That's going to come with the territory. So you can't go to the mall and go pick out some shirts with your sons. You're not able to go to the movies and watch the latest action flick, with your kids. Or it's going to be very tough for you to go to your local supermarket and pick up some bread. That's rough. But you have also allowed yourself to make generational wealth that those amenities you can work around. And as I said, that's just the way things work. So when you saw him in the hotel room at some point talking about this is the life he lives, he had a cigar, was just lying down on the couch saying you can't go anywhere. I don't know if it's and I'm not in his shoes, and none of us are. And some of us, if we were in his shoes, would say the same thing and have that perspective. But it's very tough to have sympathy, maybe a little bit empathy, but not sympathy. Empathy, you can kind of relate to and acknowledge that he has those feelings as far as living in kind of a caged world. So you can acknowledge that, like, okay, I can comprehend, understand it. But to get sympathy, not so much. But this is why this is a really good documentary. We're starting to see a guy at that point in his life dealing with those emotions and dealing with the realities of his life. So I thought it's been very well done. The basketball stuff, I would say I knew about 75% of it. Because now, stuff in the early 80s, I remember his second year when he broke his foot and him trying to come back. I was not too familiar with that story. But once you start getting into the 90s with the Dream Team and his first set of championships. I was watching all those games beginning to end. So I'm right in my wheelhouse right now. So very intrigued by all that stuff. And that's going to conclude our show today. Thanks for listening. And we'll come back in the very near future with some more news and notes in the world of sports. As always, for everything that we're doing on Twitter and Instagram, under the Sports Inquirer, that's all one word. Facebook, the Sports Inquirer, and the Sports Inquirer. We have 2 pages on Facebook. Go to either one. You're all good. And find subscribe to us on YouTube and SoundCloud under the Sports Inquirer. So until next time, good fight, good night, and be safe.